let's start by talking about the AI phenomenon. Russ, you've been leading technology companies for 20, 25 years, but I believe Laradin is your first AI-driven company. Think back to right before you started Laradin. What were you seeing in the market then that led you to launch Laradin a few years ago? What problems were you solving?
What we found from talking to our friends who were CIOs, CFOs, heads of HR at large companies is, they were all very excited about this, but they were doing tons and tons of experimentation. And while they were confident there was going to be tons of value for many years to come, no one was really sure what it was going to be. So we thought it was a great time to build a set of tools to help companies understand what was happening inside their organization with AI, where they were driving productivity, where they weren't, where they needed to focus on training, tools for managers, a whole suite of services we offer at Laradin.
AI adoption is real, but maturity is really rare. Almost 9 in 10 enterprises now say AI is really important to achieving their business goals, which tells us that AI has really crossed from that hype cycle to expectation of businesses that they have, that this can really move the needle and impact the business in significant ways.
There are some large companies spending $1 billion plus on AI. Of course, CFOs are going to want to understand ROI. Of course, you're going to want to drive efficiency. Of course, you're going to have to drive change management, because what we see in most of these enterprises is, yes, 10 or 15% of their employees are using the tools to basically become supermen and superwomen. But most people really don't know how to use them, which is understandable, right? HR doesn't know how to train people to do this. Managers don't know how to manage people to do this because the tools didn't exist 2 years ago.
We see adoption has been increasing over the years. Part of our maturity model is that we look at across 4 pillars. We look at data readiness, we look at strategy and roadmap, we look at regulatory and compliance, as well as just tech adoption. And what we're seeing is that to the point that you made just a minute or two ago, people are adopting the tech, and they're trying to get their arms around security.
These tools are unbelievable. But as I point out, they're unbelievable and powerful and expensive and not obvious how everyone in the workforce, from, your 22-year-old who just graduated college to your 64-year-old who's, more toward the, end of their career, it is not obvious how they're all going to magically know how to use them tomorrow.
Certainly across different functional areas in a company, there may be different levels of understanding not only how to use them, but how to use them most effectively and efficiently.
You're not going to sit down with your CFO and say, $800 million we're going to spend in this technology category that didn't exist 3 years ago, and not have a discussion about ROI, tracking, trade-offs. Of course. By the way, the issue is, as everyone can understand with AI, if it's 800 million this year, it's going to be 3 billion next year. So how do we know if that's good or bad? And how do we get the most out of it?
Karen and I were around back in the days when the public cloud first got launched in the 2008, 2010-ish, and some similar questions where initially there were blank checks. Anyone could spend whatever they wanted, and the expenditure wasn't questioned. It wasn't certainly at the magnitude that we're seeing with the AI investments.
There's been all this experimentation. There's all this money being spent. But that's not sustainable forever, right? Like, you need to have some grasp on whether this is giving the ROI for the business that it requires to justify that spend. So as AI becomes embedded everywhere, it's inside of SaaS tools, it's co-pilots, there are agents. It's really easy for leaders, business leaders, to lose line of sight.
AI in companies is driving tremendous, tremendous value in coding, in call centers, in legal tools, in marketing, in sales. I mean, we all know this, we all see this. So while it might be true that lots of pilots failed early on, this isn't some overhyped, not going to be a thing fad in a couple of years. We all know this, right? We know in 3 years companies will use more AI. We know in 5 years they will use more, and we know in 8 years they will use more. Like, this is definitely true. So of course you're going to move from experimentation to having a harness to make sure it's part of your budgeting and planning cycle, to understanding trade-offs.
We've established that there's a problem out there or a challenge, a gap that needs to be filled. Now let's talk about the solution. And I'm going to use a phrase that Laridan uses, AI impact intelligence. Russ, can you define that and explain how Laridan delivers on that in order to fill this gap?
Fundamentally, it's right there in the words. Our general perspective is there is going to be a third-party company, maybe there will be more, but there will be a third-party company that becomes the trusted brand for helping companies understand what is happening with AI in their organization, how is it being used, where is it being used, how proficient are their employees, what does great look like, what else should you do, and where are you driving productivity. And so we think that entire kind of umbrella of measurement of AI for your organization as what we are thinking about around when we talk about AI impact intelligence. It's just fundamentally, you should get smart about the impact of AI in your organization.
You've talked a lot about the fact that you don't necessarily tell businesses to squelch shadow AI. I think that a big part of this is how Laridan delivers on the opportunity of showing businesses, when you say what's working, it's not only what's working in terms of pilots that the companies know about.
There's two ways to think about shadow AI, right? There's the security piece. And my perspective on the security piece is I take no position on it at all. We're not telling companies what they should or shouldn't do. If you'd like to allow there to be hundreds of experiments inside your organization, and as long as you have some data framework in place, or maybe even if you don't, let 1,000 flowers bloom, wonderful. That's between your CIO, your CISO, your various leaders. That's not for me to decide. There are some very large public companies that are extremely locked down. They have an AI steering committee. They know about everything happening in their company. There are some extremely large public companies that are truly letting their employees experiment, with some amount of guidelines.